This is a feedback QR code. It'll be at the end too with the link. So if anybody wants to scan that quickly, they can. I see people taking pictures and doing it. Cool. So we'll get started. And just in case you didn't know what session you're in session on how to get the auditors off your butt with DBA checks. Thought that would be a cool title. I'm Tracy Baggiano. I'm known as a database superhero. I did not dub myself that title. My coworkers did, based on my volunteer work with foster kids. Trust me, I'm not going to go over all these logos. Just one. I volunteer with foster kids with the North Carolina Guardian Ad Litem program. I will have been doing that 20 years in June. And that is my passion outside of the community. I represent their best interests in court, and it takes up a lot of my time, but that's what I enjoy doing. But the best way to find me is probably databasesuperhero.com, and then there's icons to get to Twitter and email and all that stuff. I do respond to emails, so if you got any questions after this presentation, I respond to DMs too. My DMs are open. You don't even have to follow me on Twitter, and you can find me there. But basically, I can be found somewhere, usually trying to make a difference, because icons. So we're going to start with a brief introduction. But why I'm doing this presentation. So I used to work for DocuSign, and we had a US system where we had some government people storing data in our system, and for that we had to be CIS compliant. And we had internal auditors that would run their checks against our system and tell us that, hey, we're not compliant with this particular requirement under CIS. And we would check the system, and we actually were. So it was like we needed something as DBAs to tell us, hey, we were compliant, so that we could go back to our internal auditors and tell them that they were like full of what. So, DBA checks can check your configuration on your server, and it does much more than just security checks. It does a whole lot of, it's got 200 and some configuration checks it does. It can check your max DOP and your max memory and a whole bunch of other things, if you've got full backups running, your log backups and different things like that. So it's not just for security, just so you know. You can do a whole lot of other stuff. So I contacted Rob and Chrissy, because they wrote DBA checks and DBA tools, and it was like, hey, what do you think about it doing compliance stuff? And they're like, hey, we've thought about that before. We actually have a issue in there for this. That would be fantastic. So I was like, cool. And they're like, create a project for it. And next thing I knew, I had wrote all the checks for CIS in there, and Rob had approved it, and he put out this great tweet about me having done it, and here we are. So I wanted to write a presentation that shows people how to use it. So we're going to go through how to use DBA checks, so you know how to actually get there and do a CIS audit with it. And then we'll briefly cover how you can actually copy a few files and create your own checks as well. That way, if you need to do your own security compliance with a different security compliance, because I know some of you are in Europe and you might have other stuff to do, you can actually write some stuff until we actually get it in there, because I would like to put more security compliance in there and, make it more available for more stuff. So, and I've sprinkled the little, Dungeons and Dragons stuff throughout here. They don't mean much except for the bearded guy when I talk about Rob. So, how many of you have heard some of these stuff? I know if you're in Europe, you've heard of the last one. So, yeah. You have to check your systems for some of this stuff, and they're hard to maintain sometimes, and it'd be easier if you had a way to check it. And if you have to rely on your internal auditors like we did at DocuSign, they would run like the 2017 checks against our 2016 servers, and there were checks in 2017 that don't apply, and then they would be griping at us, and we're like, but that doesn't apply. And they would be trying to get me to change like the geography data type to a safe CLR. I can't do that. That's an internal Microsoft thing. And then you have startup stored procedures for replication and SSIS. I can't change that. So I made CIS smart. It literally, if it's the replication and the SIS startup stored procedure, it won't flag it because it's smart. And if it's a geography data types, and there's a couple other ones, those are just two that I remember, it won't flag it. So you actually know that you're actually compliant because it's, smart. Unlike the data tools that the security companies have written that should be smarter than our stuff. So what is dbachecks? Basically, open source PowerShell module. I'm assuming everybody's heard of DBA tools, maybe? Yeah. So this one was particularly developed by Rob Sewell, hence the bearded guy. But it uses mostly DBA tools commands under the scenes, and the Pester PowerShell module. Pester is designed to run tests. So this runs tests against your systems and sees if it passes or fails a particular test. So this is exactly what it's designed to do. And it basically just checks your configurations on your servers and makes sure it validates whether it works or not. And it provides output to either PowerBI directly, or you can put it into a table so that you can do reporting on it. And technically, you can just read it from the JSON file and stick it into anything else. At DocuSign, we had this system that did custo querying that was custom and all this stuff. So that's why I mentioned the JSON thing. And yeah, we did a lot more complicated setup than trying to stick it into a SQL table. So as far as installation goes, it's just like installing most PowerShell modules, except one thing. We need to make sure we install Pester 4 right now, because Pester 5 does not work with DBA tools, and by default it would install Pester 5. Rob is in the middle of upgrading to Pester 5 so that you can have a newer version. It should be out really soon, so I always mention this first, because if you just do the default of install dbachecks, it won't work. You'll Google it, and you'll probably find my other presentation that tells you how to do this, because this is the first time I'm doing this one, and this one's not published yet, so it won't pop up. So that's why this slide exists, to tell you to make sure you install Pester 4 first before you install the dbachecks module. And the dbachecks module will automatically download the newest DBA tools and the PS framework as well. So those are the modules that are needed for it. So then we're off and running. So after this, we'll go through some basic commands. So first command will be the Get-DbcCheck, so you can see what different checks are there. You have the tag parameter. So one of the tag parameters would be like CIS for the different checks that are available for the CIS compliance. And it would just list them out so you know which different checks are available. Then you also have them by group. So if you wanted to know what was available for databases, it would pop them out. What's available for HADR, because it can check things against your AGs. What's available for the maintenance solution? Those are specific to all Halogram solutions, so it will check to make sure that's actually installed. So, and there's different ways to actually customize how it looks at the checks. So we'll cover those in a little bit. So this is an example of the checks for CIS, for example. Like, I don't know, one of the silliest ones I think is database mail can't be enabled. We just never adhered to that one because we need alerts, auditors. And another one we didn't do was like DAC. We need remote admin just in case something happens. But these are the different ones that you need to have on your system. Or there's actually more, but these are the ones. And then these are all the different tags. If you did one of these tags, it would pop up and show you the different listed ones and stuff. So. And then you could actually do a search by pattern. If you stuck like backup in there, it would show you anything that actually listed backup in the list. And that way, if you didn't, it would do it in the description as well. That way, if you didn't know exactly what tag it was, you could actually find different things that were related to something. That way, you don't have to know exact words to search for. So you can just put in a search term. And for example, like this is backup, so I got everything that was listed for like test/backup. So it found a different list for different things, so you didn't have to know an exact word to search for. So that gives you an easy way to go through and find a list of all the checks. And of course, if you don't put anything in, it would just give you like a list of everything. But then that gives you like 200 and some things to have to sort through, and that's not as much fun as trying to narrow down the list. I'm waiting for someone to take a picture. So, and these slides will be uploaded if you don't want to have to take pictures of everything. So they will. I don't know if Bits. They haven't sent me a link to upload them. So if they're not uploaded to Bits within a week, I will upload them to my website. So or GitHub or somewhere. So and then put a blog out about where they're at. So that way you don't have to keep taking pictures. But as far as running checks, we have the Invoke-DbcCheck command. And to really accept it, if you put in the defaults, it'll run a number of commands. It doesn't run every command. There are some commands that are set up to skip because you may not want to be security compliant on your system. There may be like the database mail disabled. You may, by default, that one doesn't check because there are some things that you don't want to adhere to. So you basically run it. You would put in your instance. You can provide a SQL credential if you have to have like a SQL login, or you can leave that out and it would do Windows authentication. And then you would tell it what check you want to run, or you can not tell it what check. You can actually put in the group like database and it'll run everything that's database related. This one I just did database mail enabled because we're on CIS. And of course, this setting was not set up to be disabled on my system, so it's like, you're not compliant. No, the security people are coming for us. So, but I failed my audits. But at any rate, but this is what the tests look like if you put it out to the console. They'll come up in red if it doesn't pass, and you can go, I need to go fix that, and things are not cool, and the auditors are all, But some more advanced commands for around the Invoke-DbcCheck is, we have the check parameter like we just seen. You can actually put multiple ones in there, but separated by a comma so that you can do more than one at a time. If you have a list of like the defaults that are there and you just want to exclude one or two, you can do that as well by excluding a couple of them. If there's only certain databases you want to run it against, you can do that as well. If you want to exclude a database, say like your DBA tools database that you might be storing database stuff related to, and you don't want to do that one, or your model database or something like that, you can exclude the checks on those because those have special stuff in it that don't need to be checked. And you can run the group by doing the tag command. You can put the tag in there and run a group of stuff. So there's different options that are available to help you customize what you run it against. And then you can actually control the output to the screen. Instead of seeing like the detailed output on the screen, you can use the show command and only show what's failed or the summary and consolidate that down so you're not showing so much output on the screen. So basically we looked at the Get-DbcCheck command, the invoke, and we looked at some more advanced options on stuff like that. So any questions? Yes.
I got a question from online. Can you install the PowerShell module Pester and dbachecks on a central server and check your estate that way, or do they have to be installed on each server?
You can centralize it, yes. That is the best way to do it. Oh, sorry. I forget that part. The question was, can you install the modules on a central server and check everything centralized, or do you have to install the modules on every server? You can install it on a central server and check every server. So you can just pass in a parameter that contains all your SQL instances and then check everything in your estate as long as it can connect to them. So there are different places you can output all of this stuff to. So one, as we just seen in the print screen, was just to the console and the PowerShell console. You can actually output it straight to PowerBI, not the recommended way because it's only a one-time deal and you don't get historical information. You can output it straight to the database and then open PowerBI and refresh it. You don't get historical information that way either. So I always just skip to, whoops, too many datas. But straight to the database for historical reporting is my recommended way to do it. That way you can show over time if anything changed. And if you weren't compliant at a particular point in time, you can show that you've made progress in getting compliant, or you can show that something changed because somebody, hey, went in there and did something that they weren't supposed to do. And it's like, okay, I went back in and fixed it. So I'm just going to show you print screens of that. By the way, I don't have any demos today because it's a 50-minute presentation. I wanted to leave time for questions and stuff, so I put everything as print screens and stuff. So basically, Rob has all this on his GitHub repo, and there's a link to it at the end. So he has some tables you set up, and once you import it, he has some triggers that populate the actual main table so it's historical, so it's like a staging table, and then it puts it into regular tables. And then you run PowerShell, which you'll see in the next slide, or 2 slides away, I think. And you run the PowerShell, and you save it into results. And then you just open Rob's report that he has on the GitHub and refresh it after you point it to your database and stuff. You edit your data source, you hit refresh, and you've got historical reporting, and you just trend it over days, weeks, or however often you decide to run it. So this is the code that you would actually run after you set up the database. You just invoke dbccheck, you pass it through. If you want to see something on the screen, show fails, or you can just show nothing. You write the data table to the results and tell it that you want to write it to the summary table, or you want to write it to the detail table. Then all your data is in there. Then when you open up your report, you've already changed your data source and stuff, and this is a report you would get. And then you can drill down on stuff using PowerBI, and you can drill down to the instance. As you see here, we've got 3 different instances that he's ran it against. And then you can drill down into the different groups that he has, like the agent, the database, the domain, and see what different things have failed or passed. And then the greens are, of course, what's passed, and the reds what's failed. And you can do whatever you need as far as reporting, because managers, auditors, everybody likes pretty pictures. They're a lot better to navigate than anything else. And of course, you can take this report and publish it in your Power BI estate, and everybody can have access to it that needs access to it, and everybody gets a little bit happier about seeing data, because that's what people like. So basically, like I said, you've got different ways you can do it. When you're playing around with it, the best way to do it is with the console, so that you can get everything set up and see what it's doing, make sure it's working, because you don't want historical stuff in there that's junk. Okay, the really powerful part is actually setting up configurations, because there's a lot of stuff you need to set up to get it working the way you want it working. So first off, you need to know what checks you're actually going to run based on what you're going to do. So we're going to assume that you're going to run a CIS security check here, because security thing. So first off, you want to get a list of your security checks, and we're going to decide which ones we want to run. But we also have some DbcCheck checks in there, or STIG, depending on, US government stuff, because this is, I'm from the US, and DocuSign was doing US stuff. So they both have a list of checks in there. All the DbcCheck ones aren't in there, but all the CIS ones are. And so you get a list of your checks. You're going to be deciding which ones you need to run, because like I said, there was a couple, like the database mail being disabled and a DAC, that we didn't adhere to. So there's ways to disable those so that you don't have to check those. That way, it doesn't flag as being, bad. So first thing you need to do is be able to look at a check and figure out what you can configure on it, so that you can configure stuff so that you know that it will run and what it will run against. So there's a config value for every check that's in there that tells you the different config things that you can run. So for example, last full backup is actually a thing that you need to make sure that is compliant. It needs to have ran in the last 7 days. So if you do a format list on it, you'll get these options. So if you look at the config value on here, it's got a number of things on there. It's not a good way to actually look at it. It's kind of like, lined up this way. So I came up with a better way to look at it. If you use a split instead, it gives you a nice list. So one of the first things I would configure config value is the app SQL instance. So you could send in your whole list of SQL servers that you need to check one time. That way, when we save our config, we never have to send it in again. Every server you need to check, save it in there. Eventually, we're going to save our config to a JSON file. That way, we can import and export everything we need to check. And we never have to define the SQL servers again, except when we add a server, of course, into our environment. So, and like I said, we can set our full max days. If for some reason, like 7 days is a requirement for CIS, but you may have a requirement if you got to do it every day, because your system may be small enough where you do it every day or every 3 days, whatever it may be. You can set it to something different. And you can give it a grace period as well. You can tell it that, you don't care about read-only databases. Definitely, you may not be backing it up on the secondaries if you have AGs, so you want to make sure it doesn't flag those as well. So, you've got these different config values that you can go in and customize and make sure you're not getting flagged on things that are, not relevant. So that's where the Set-DbcConfig command comes in. So you're going to go in. Most of the time, these config values are already set to reasonable values, so you don't have to customize most things. But there are instances where your environment's going to be different than the reasonable values that are set by the community. So you definitely want to customize your environment. Yes?
Can you set different config for different servers? Make a different behavior?
Can you set different config values for different servers? What you're going to end up doing there is saving different config files so that you can do that. And then you would use different environments, a different environment variable with the Invoke-DbcCheck command so that you can save it as a different group inside that report. So for example, if you had a prod and a QA environment or however you group your servers together, you would save those config values together so that the different servers are grouped together. So basically, yes, but you would save them as different config files, so that they're not individual server values, but different configuration files. So the answer is yes, but you got to set it up that way. So for example, like log backups, I know a lot of people do those different. I mean, some people take them every 10 minutes. I know places that take them every minute, some 15 minutes, every hour. Sometimes that changes on different systems. So that's one thing that, gets customized a lot. I think the default's every 60 minutes in dbachecks. So that's one thing that, most people sometimes go in and customize. So again, the very basic command would be, set-dbcconfig. You set your policy that was listed in the config value, and you just give it a value, and then now that's what it's testing against. So then, after you set all your config values to the way you want them, you would just export it with the export command. And you're going to do this based on your different compliance options or your different settings that you need across your configurations. And you set them, you export them to whatever, something besides your temp directory, of course, demo purposes, and short on the screen. You save them. And then when you're ready to run them, you're just going to import them and invoke your command. That way you get what you need. This is going fast. Maybe I should do demos. I might bring up demos. Because I do have demos. So. But the first thing you want to do before you import anything is go ahead and reset your config. That way it's set to the defaults. And then import whatever config you've actually saved. And then invoke your checks based on your configs. And then just go ahead and reset it. And then, like I say, you can run your next security check if you had DISA all set up. Or one thing that people do in the community is they have morning checks that just check to see if their SQL agent jobs have run, their backups have run, whatever you have for things in the morning. And then they have a report that they go and check. It doesn't just have to be security. It can be anything. Then they run another check. So. And that's what the reset does, just set it back to the defaults because there's lots of defaults. Now I have a very easy command to turn on all of CIS because most of CIS is set to skip and not check. And you don't want to set like all 30 some of them, but that takes a long time. And I do have the commands on a blog post where you could set all 30 of them, but let's make it a little bit simpler. And then you can go to my website and find the ones you want to skip. So you can just run this command and it'll turn them on all by default. And then you can find the ones you want to skip and turn those off. Set your app SQL instances to all your SQL instances you need to check. And your computer names as well, because they do have certain ones that are based on the computer names. Save your config to what you need it to be. Import and invoke and run your test. So run this. Basically, reset, set the dbcconfig with our SQL instances, our computer names, because my SQL instances all have the same. I don't have like instant named instances. The computer names are all the same because I don't like name instances. Turn them all on, save my files somewhere appropriate, reset my config, import my config that I saved, run my invoke, and I'm all done with my security check. Of course, I'm actually saving it to the database and doing that fancy commands from before. So, but this is like what it looks like to actually set the configs where they are actually turned on by default. Because like I said, so if you need to turn any of these off, you can by just flipping them to true, and it won't run it. Or you can change the fact that you want your error log count not to be 12. I have mine set to 99, and it just recycles every night so that I can look 99 days or recharge back, whichever happens to be. There's more than these, of course, because print screens I didn't want to be teeny tiny. So this is how you get there. And I know someone was in here asking about patching. I don't know if they're still in here, but that's one of the things that's actually on here is to make sure it's up to the newest CU. So by default, that's actually turned on in CIS. I don't know if he stayed for the presentation or not. So that's actually one of the things as part of the security audit is making sure you're patched, because usually, sometimes they're fixing security stuff. How many GDRs have we gotten in the last year? 2? Even went back to 2014? Ouch. Because true fact, at my company, for some reason, patching was set up for 3 p.m. in the afternoon. I just started there. I didn't do it. I just started there in May, but patching was set up for 3 p.m. And I happened to be set up a change request the day before, and they thought I restarted the servers. I didn't do it. I had to tell them that, because they're like, well, that's never happened before. And I'm like, that's not my fault that you guys have 2014 and a patch hasn't came out in X number of months and years. And then they're like, oh, yeah, patching set up for 3 p.m. I'm like, yeah. Maybe you should change that. And they're like, well, SQL shouldn't restart because it's patching. And well, that's not my problem. That's what it does. Yeah, sorry. They try to blame me. I mean, I was like, I don't do things that restart servers in the middle of the afternoon. Just, But yeah, and so there is that. So, but in conclusion, we have the Get-DbcCheck command, the Set-DbcCheck command, the export, import, reset, and of course the thing where you can just turn on CIS and don't have to go through that long thing. I have a blog post that explains how to do the CIS in detail and on my blog post, and it's linked at the end. So, any questions? There's supposed to be a section slide there that I must not have unhid. Yes?
Yeah, the tests, are they static? Are they updated with a new version, or are there also line checks?
New version is the... Oh, sorry. I'll let you finish talking before.
If I'm thinking about the other categories, there are some... they are changing the checks in certain intervals. Are they updated by the release, or are there some online checks?
Okay, the question is, are the checks updated by the different releases? Releases of what?
Of the checks.
Of the security checks. Not currently, because I don't know which ones have been released yet. I don't know if CIS has released anything since 2019.
Yeah, but you have other, in GDPR and the other categories.
comment was we have other categories. So far, GDPR is, if I said that right, I always get the initials wrong, is not in there yet. So we need a request for that and a project set up, and then we need Rob to finish Pester 5. Otherwise, you're going to have a whole lot more work to do to rewrite them. But I do plan on writing more checks in there for security stuff as once he gets Pester 5 upgraded. But I will try to keep them up to date once we get them in there as things change. But right now, the only full one in there is CIS. I do have a project set up for STIG or /DISA, whichever one everybody calls it, because different people call it different things. And I'm just waiting for Pester 5 to get completed because, like I said, Rob will have to rewrite every check I put in there to fit Pester 5 because Pester 5 just is not compliant with Pester 4. So the hope is to keep them up to date once they're in there. So, with some effort. Hopefully the community will chip in on that. So, 30 minutes. So, writing your own checks is not that hard. So, it looks a little bit hard. So, we'll actually bring up VS Code to take a look at those. But because most security compliance items aren't in there, I did want to show this to you because you may need to, if you need the compliance, you may want to write your own so that you have it. And if you do write your own, save them, and you can help me out, and then I'll put them in there, or you can contribute them, whichever way. So right now, like I said, I've got a project sitting out there for STIG because I wanted to put it in there because DocuSign was getting STIG compliant right before I left. And, well, I was waiting for Pester 5. And I just left in May, and it just takes a long time to rewrite stuff. So the first thing you would need to do is we're going to set a config value like we were doing before, and you're going to add your repo. Of course, you're not going to put it in your temp directory like I'm doing, but you're going to pin the repo on there so that it knows what code to go look at. And then you need two things. You need assertions, which is basically a function that it will call, and it tells it what to do. It tells it what like DBA tools command to run and what value it's looking for. That's basically all it is. And then you need what custom test it's running, which is the pestered thing it's doing. So it describes what to do and blah, 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 blah stuff. Sorry, I'm not very technical sometimes. It's easier to see it than it is to describe it. That's why I just bleh. So the best thing to do is actually look at the files that exist. That's how I do it. I don't remember how to do it ever. I just go in there and find one that's there, and I kind of copy and paste it, and then I figure it out. Because it's like, most of them are similar. Like, if you have a SP configure value, like, I think the example I wrote was remote data archive has to be turned off for STIG. There's all kinds of SP configure values already in there, so it's like, just copy and paste and, change it around. So that one happens to be an instance one. So there's an instance test one and instance insertions one. So I copied those over. Well, I didn't copy the whole file because it's big, but I made a file and I just put custom in front of it or custom in the name and then changed what I needed to change, like this, and put them in my temp directory. So we'll actually go take a look at that because we do have time. I didn't think we would, because when I did this at Redmond last week, they made me talk for 1 hour and 20 minutes. They did. So basically, is that big enough? I want to make sure, because it was definitely big enough virtually.
Maybe one more.
One more?
Yeah.
Okay. Now let me move stuff around on my screen so I have room. So basically what you do is you tell it up at the top, you're going to replace it with, look at the test files. That's what it's doing to make sure it finds the test file in here. And you're going to tell it, hey, here's where my assertions are. And I like I said, I just copied this from his test file, wherever it happens to be on the top of my bar. Yeah, I want to save that. So this is all just copied and pasted from the top of his thing. So see, very basic. So all this is copy, copy, copy. This is all copied. It just tells it to get your instance that you sent in and do a for each around every instance that's stored in the variables. again, copied. It tries to connect to the instance. If it can't connect, it goes, blah, blah, I can't do this. Help, help. No, it doesn't go help, help. But it tells you it can't connect, and it fails, and it moves on to the next instance. So then it gets the instance info, so it knows what tags and things are going on. And then we actually go into the pester part, and we give it a description of what we're trying to do. We're checking our remote data is disabled. We give it whatever tags we want it to have. So these are normally the defaults for DISA, that, hey, this is a high thing. They don't like this on, it's bad, help, help. And we want to make sure we know what security it is. We want something descriptive so we know what tag to run it under. And then we tell it what we're testing. And basically, you know, I copied and pasted this and changed the description from one of the other SP-configure values that was there. And then I have my assertion that tells it what to run, which is a DBA tools command. So all this is just really copy and paste and changing descriptions. So it's really simple as far as the pester side goes to get this copied and pasted and running, because you're just copying from an existing file. So then we go to assertions, and this is really more, you start off with the copy paste up here. It looks at the instance info, it switches to the tags. We assign it the same tag we had over there, remote data archive. We have this part copied and pasted because it has variables that it's got to go through. It lies and tells you this variable is not in use down at the bottom, even though it is, because look, it's right there, it's down at the bottom. But this is a descriptive part at the top that makes it run faster. It's got all this stuff it's got to run against the instance, and you put everything that you're running against the instance up at the top, and you're just really describing it and what it's doing. You get your SP-configure value stored in here so that you have a variable to check against. Then you have your assertion down at the bottom that tells it, hey, I've got this all instance info that I just created up at the top. Here's the configure value. Hey, it should be 0 because we expect it to be disabled. And you can put whatever description you need in there because DISA doesn't like it. And you can put like DISA has that V blah, blah, blah number because of spec blah, 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 so that you can tie it back to their specifications if you need to question.
Yeah, this one's for me actually. So it looks like when you do the assertions, it's following a bit of like a Gherkin type syntax. Is that fairly standard, or is it something completely customized to this?
He's asking if it's following a Gherkin standard syntax or if it's customized to this. No, this is pretty much standard to like the pester stuff and how it's set up to run. So it's pretty much set up that way. But yeah, that's pretty much all it is to set up a test. I mean, you're just running a DBA tools command. I mean, if you know what command to run up here and store the value, you're just copying and pasting from the original files. And then it's setting up the repo, and then it automatically picks it up when you have the repo in there. I think I have another question. Yes, the question was, is it in the documentation? And the answer is yes, and there's actually a blog post about it that's written by someone else that you can find linked to when you go to dbachecks.io that directs you to the GitHub. And I got a link to it at the end of the presentation as well. So, and again, if you can't find it, just email me or DM me on Twitter, and I will make sure that you know how to do it, or I'll send it to you, or I will jump on a Zoom call with you and show you how to do it if you need me to. I will make sure that you know how to do anything in this presentation if you need it. So, well, I saved time for questions, I think. I may have went too fast because Redmond talked to me forever. And I can run through more demos if people want me to. I have a notebook full of demos. But I think these were the resources I put out here. I do have a notebook that has demos in it. Rob has a whole slew of stuff on his GitHub as well. There's a CIS Security Checks blog post I wrote last year. no, beginning of this, no, it's last year because it's a new year now. And there's his link to his GitHub repository with the historical reporting, because that's the best way to output it, is historical reporting. You know, you need history. I mean, you need to know what happened previously. I mean, just outputting it one time is not as cool. This is the best way to contact me again. The easiest way, because, you know, Baggiano is hard to spell unless you're Italian. Or, you know, the restaurant Maggiano's, and you can just put the BO in front of it. I do respond very quickly to emails and DMs on Twitter. This is a feedback form. I do think I went, like, really quick, unfortunately, but